think when you decide to do a role as an actor, if you're honest with yourself, you choose all those things, both the good and the bad that's happened to you, and you try to make that come alive.
So it's still you.
Oh yeah, it's still you
in that admiral.
Yeah, but the writer has done you a favor. He says you are dressed a certain way, and that you stand a certain way, or you give off a certain kind of energy, and he's done a lot of your work for you.
Do you like?
In a startling turn of events, the recent discovery of Gene Hackman's final letter has captivated fans and observers alike, offering a glimpse into the mind of a legendary actor who retreated from the limelight. This letter, rather than being a simple farewell or a note of gratitude, unveils a haunting self-indictment filled with fears and struggles that plagued Hackman in his later years. What drove this iconic figure to such profound introspection? And what secrets lie within the words he left behind? Families, friends, colleagues, and fans are still shocked to learn the news of the sudden death of legendary Hollywood actor Gene Hackman and his wife. But few people know that Gene seems to have long felt his death clearly. Back in the summer of 2011, under the scorching, arid heat of Santa Fe, Gene Hackman sat on his weathered gray wooden porch, granting a rare interview to GQ magazine. It was an unusual moment, as Hackman had kept his private world tightly closed for many years. A tape recorder rested on the table, while the air carried the smoky aroma of burning wood from an old fireplace. Hackman, his eyes a blend of serenity and sorrow, began to speak about an unexpected topic, the inevitability of death. "I dream about my own death more often than I should," he admitted, his voice rough, as though each word had to be unearthed from the depths of his soul. The legendary actor, who had once embodied unforgettable characters on screen, now sat reflecting on his inevitable end as if it were a simple fact, or worse, as if it loomed so near he could almost reach out and touch it. For years, the film industry had tried to convince Gene Hackman to come back. Francis Ford Coppola, a longtime collaborator, wrote him a heartfelt, 3-page handwritten letter, urging him to take on one last role, a part crafted specifically for Hackman. Even Clint Eastwood, a contemporary and close friend, made the trip to Santa Fe, sharing a bourbon with him in hopes of swaying his resolve. Yet Hackman turned them all down, not out of disdain for cinema, but because he understood that some chapters in life are best left closed. Reopening them, he believed, would only hasten their decay.
Unless you were looking at some other monitor, you weren't looking at it.
No, I don't like to watch.
You don't like to watch yourself? Do you go to your own films?
No, once in a while I'll see one, but I prefer to think of myself the way I feel, which is 23. And then
Oh, vanity.
I see this old man up
vanity,
there.
I
Yeah, right.
see. I...
Gene Hackman spent his final years shrouded in mystery, deliberately fading from the public eye. Yet, no matter how much he tried to distance himself, unsettling thoughts about the end continued to haunt him. The first clue emerged in 2018, a handwritten letter addressed to Dustin Hoffman, his longtime friend from their challenging early days in New York. The existence of this letter remained unknown until after Hackman was gone, when Hoffman chose to share it. The shaky handwriting revealed a glimpse into Hackman's complex emotional state during his later years. "If one day I disappear, remember I was happy, but not always," he wrote. The message was enigmatic, at once light-hearted and deeply somber. Was it a goodbye, a confession, or the faint echo of a man who had once stood at the pinnacle, now confronting the encroaching shadows? Those closest to Hackman knew he was not one to easily share such sentiments. Throughout his life, he maintained a steely discipline, masking his personal struggles with humor and resilience. Yet in this letter, Hackman bared a side of himself rarely seen, a man who had achieved everything yet grappled with the fear of his own impermanence. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, who stood by him through every high and low, confided in a friend, "There are nights when Gene doesn't sleep. He just sits by the window, staring out into the darkness for hours without saying a word. I don't ask him why. I know there are storms within him that I'll never be able to reach." The arrival of the letters, the peculiar dreams, and the mornings when Hackman pedaled through town only to linger for ages in front of the small cemetery on the corner, all felt like subtle signals, noticeable only to the keenest eyes. Gene Hackman had no fear of departure. What unsettled him, perhaps, was the fixation on being erased, or worse, being remembered in a twisted, distorted manner, something he had loathed throughout his life. The letter to Dustin Hoffman, later encased in a small glass frame at Hoffman's home, served as a poignant keepsake of a friendship that spanned over 50 years. "If one day I vanish, maybe Gene Hackman never truly disappeared. He simply withdrew, gradually dissolving into the desert's fading light, leaving his final murmurs to linger like the remnants of a fading legend. Then, in January 2024, when Gene Hackman's name had nearly faded from Hollywood's collective memory, an unexpected shockwave emerged from the least likely of places, his old office. The modest room in Santa Fe, long abandoned to the relentless desert sun, became the epicenter of intrigue. The catalyst was someone presumed to have vanished from Hackman's life years ago, his former personal assistant. This individual, whose identity remains confidential by request, reached out to a seasoned journalist with revelations so astonishing they left even the most hardened reporters in disbelief. Hidden for over 15 years, Gene Hackman had left behind a top-secret letter, its very existence a mystery to everyone, including his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Tucked away in the bottom drawer of the oak desk where Hackman had spent countless hours writing, the envelope had grown yellowed with age. On the front, written in his distinct, steady handwriting, though unsteady toward the end, were the words, "For those who care when I'm no longer here." Just a few simple words, yet they pierced the stillness of the dusty room like a blade. Those who knew Gene Hackman understood he was not one to share emotions easily, nor the kind of artist to divulge his private musings. Yet within that envelope lay the most personal, profound expression of his inner world, carefully preserved and waiting for the right moment to be unveiled. Before we continue to delve into more details in this letter, please take a few seconds to subscribe to our channel, All Profiles. Thanks a lot. When the letter was opened, the handwriting was the first thing to send a chill through everyone present. It was unmistakably Gene's, each letter slanting slightly to the right, with commas placed just a bit off from proper grammatical norms, exactly like the handwritten notes he used to send to Dustin Hoffman or Coppola. This wasn't a fake letter. It wasn't some fabricated document. It was Gene Hackman's final confession, words he couldn't bring himself to speak while he was alive. The letter spanned nearly 3 pages. There were no flowery introductions and no emotional goodbyes. Gene got straight to the point, just as he had lived his life, cold, resolute, and unwilling to let personal feelings cloud his actions. But as the words unfolded, the weight of the darkness he had carried for nearly a century became undeniable. I've always known how my story would end. The opening line struck like a lightning bolt in a barren desert. This wasn't a vague prediction or some cruel twist of fate. Gene Hackman had written about a truth he had carried with him since his youth. The letter didn't clarify what Gene Hackman meant by end, but the subsequent paragraphs slowly unveiled a hidden truth. He recounted a night in 1957 when he was an unknown young man working at a small roadside diner. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen, Gene heard a voice behind him. It wasn't a customer or a co-worker, it was his own voice, echoing from a place he couldn't identify. It was me, but older, much older, and he said, "You won't die in Hollywood, you'll vanish in the desert." From that moment, Gene Hackman claimed he lived as a man fleeing his destiny. Every role, every award, every time he stood on the Oscar stage, none of it could erase those words. The sentence lingered like a shadow over his career, and as he aged, he became increasingly convinced that the voice wasn't a figment of his imagination. It was a warning from another version of himself, one who knew the fate this Gene Hackman would eventually face. The letter concluded with a single foreboding sentence. "When I'm no longer here, you'll ultimately understand why I left." When the letter was made public, Hollywood was shaken to its core. Fans were left in disbelief. No one fully grasped the meaning behind Hackman's message, but everyone sensed he had carried a burden, a truth too heavy for anyone to endure, even a man who had portrayed timeless legends. And so, even after Gene Hackman quietly exited this world, he left behind an unanswered mystery. A question that lingered, haunting those who dared to read his last letter. Among the pages of letters brimming with memories and fixations, one name surfaced more frequently than any Hollywood legend, not Coppola, not Clint Eastwood, not Robert Duvall, nor Dustin Hoffman. That name was Betsy Arakawa. She wasn't the woman who had stood by Gene Hackman in his youth, or celebrated his first Oscar triumph. But she was the one brave enough to venture into the darkest recesses of his soul, the places even Gene himself was reluctant to confront. Betsy wasn't a celeb. She wasn't a glamorous figure gracing red carpets, or a socialite mingling at Beverly Hills' elite gatherings. When Gene met Betsy, she was a reserved pianist who preferred the quiet company of books to conversation. Perhaps it was that serene yet unyielding presence that helped Gene Hackman break free from the relentless grip of fame he once believed was inescapable. In a letter, Gene described Betsy with words that trembled, filled with both profound love and a hint of awe. "She's the only one who knows who I really am." Betsy was more than just a wife or partner. She was the guardian of his ultimate truth, the only person who truly saw Gene Hackman beyond the facade of a Hollywood icon. He referred to her as my last sanctuary, the final refuge in an expansive desert where Gene could shed all pretense, escape the glare of the spotlight, and avoid the forced smiles for those he didn't trust. Their move to Santa Fe wasn't driven by an affection for the desert landscape or a need for a serene retirement haven. Santa Fe was Betsy's decision, a secluded place, distant enough to ensure their privacy. It was a quiet retreat where Gene could face himself fully, free from the haunting echoes of his past. It was Betsy who encouraged Gene to sell their Beverly Hills home, decline all offers for a Hollywood comeback, and gradually step away from the life that both enthralled and terrified him. Gene confessed that without Betsy, he might never have found the courage to leave behind his Hollywood persona. He had been consumed by fear that staying in the limelight too long would make him lose sight of who he truly was. He knew all too well the seductive dangers lurking beneath every red carpet, where one misstep could send him tumbling into the same abyss that had claimed so many other stars. However, beyond his fear of fame, Gene harbored another, deeper concern, the fear of losing Betsy. His letters often revealed the anxiety that greeted him each morning, the overwhelming relief that she was still by his side. He dreaded the thought of her leaving first, leaving him stranded in the vast solitude of the desert, where no one else would have the patience to hear his fears, his obsessions, or his lifelong nightmares. Honestly, behind the screen, I will return to reality and return to myself. I still have a life like any other normal person. My wife, Betsy, is a companion and confidant throughout my journey. The moments with her in the house in Santa Fe are truly the most peaceful moments, away from all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. In those quiet hours, I find a sense of tranquility that eludes me in the hustle and bustle of the film industry. Whether we're sipping coffee on the porch or taking long walks under the stars, each moment spent together feels like a precious gift. It's in these simple routines that I feel most grounded, most like myself. I can't imagine if one day she leaves me. The thought of that emptiness is unbearable, a pain that I can't fully articulate. Betsy fills my life with warmth and laughter, and without her, I fear I would drift into a void. There's a profound comfort in knowing that she understands me, that she sees beyond the roles I play on screen and loves the man I am at my core. The idea of losing that connection is truly terrifying. I often reflect on how her presence brings light into my life, and I can't help but feel a deep gratitude for every moment we share. Without her, the world would feel stark and hollow, a reminder of what I would lose, an irreplaceable bond that gives my life meaning and joy. If one day Betsy is no longer here, I will find myself without any reason to remain. This poignant line from Gene Hackman's final letter was not merely a last expression of affection from a husband to his wife, rather, it served as Gene Hackman's ultimate reflection on his bond with this world. To Gene Hackman, Betsy represented more than just love. She was the sole thread anchoring him to reality. He understood that without Betsy, the doors he had attempted to shut, the doors leading back to his past, to haunting dreams, and to the specter that foretold his destiny, would all swing wide open.
What sound or noise do you love?
I think the sound of my wife's voice.
Ultimately, the love shared between Gene and Betsy was not a typical Hollywood romance filled with grand gestures. Instead, it resembled a quiet struggle, where Betsy gently held Gene's hand, guiding him step by step out of his own darkness. Nevertheless, despite the depth of their love, it could not completely erase the fears that Gene harbored. He feared losing Betsy, feared losing himself, and feared the days that would follow when only one person would remain, trapped in the space between light and darkness. Through the intertwining of love and fear, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa embark on a profound journey together. They were two fugitives, relying on one another, nurturing their love amidst the shadows. Their love, in its essence, never alters. For 5 decades, Gene Hackman took on a variety of roles on screen, portraying everything from tough lawmen to rugged heroes to icy villains, always exuding an unshakable presence. Yet, that steadfast exterior was merely a facade behind the camera. Beneath it lay a simmering unease, a deep-seated fear that had lingered since he was a 13-year-old boy, frozen on the porch as he learned his father had chosen to walk away from life.
Well, my dad left us when I was about 13, I guess.
Was it easy, hard?
No, it was tough. Yeah.
Tough. I've read that there was a sort of a casual wave goodbye.
Yeah, I was down the street playing with some guys, and he drove by and kind of waved. And
the absence of his father, a man who quietly vanished from Gene's world without a goodbye, cast a long shadow over him. In letters discovered after Gene's passing, he wrote, "There's a curse running through the Hackman bloodline. A haunting curse. Hackman men all die alone or close the door of life with their own hands. Gene never spoke publicly about this so-called curse, but it loomed over him like a dark melody playing in the background of his life. Even as fame embraced him and awards adorned his shelves, Gene Hackman couldn't shake the sensation of an unseen presence, as though a voice persistently whispered to him about life's inescapable conclusion. In the letter, Gene never outright confessed to believing in the supernatural or in predestined fate. Yet, hidden within the trembling words, he shared a memory that could send chills down anyone's spine. Accordingly, he revealed recurring dreams. In them, he stood alone in an endless desert without Betsy, without anyone, surrounded only by sand and cold wind. A really mysterious space. And then he heard his name from someone. The voice was raspy, weary, but achingly familiar, making Gene's body tense with unease. It was his father's voice, the father who had abandoned him as a child. The moment was fleeting. Gene turned around, but the house was empty. Only Betsy sat by the fireplace, absorbed in her book. Yet from that instant, Gene was certain. He felt the presence of something close, something undeniable. I don't know how it will come, but I will know when it's near. That sentence in the letter of Gene lingered like a self-fulfilling prophecy. He didn't know the day or the hour, but he was convinced he would recognize the icy breath of fate when it loomed behind him. The dream unsettled Gene Hackman so profoundly that, even at the height of his career, he refused to accept roles relating to characters who destroyed themselves. The Hackman family curse wasn't just a tale passed down through generations, it shaped Gene Hackman's every decision. He chose to slow down, stepping away from Hollywood at the height of his career. It wasn't because he had grown weary of acting, but because he feared losing himself. Gene believed that staying in the spotlight would blur the boundaries between his true self and the characters he brought to life. Gene Hackman carried a deep fear of becoming like the tragic figures he portrayed, isolated, adrift, and consumed by inner demons. His letter concluded with a brief yet haunting line, one that lingered like an eerie whisper in the desert night. If you're reading this, I'm already part of the desert wind. It wasn't a poetic goodbye or a sentimental message. It was a stark, almost prophetic statement, as though Gene had foreseen his fate. As though he knew that one day, when the desert sands erased his footprints, all that would remain would be the wind, the dunes, and the enigmatic Hackman family curse. So when Gene Hackman's letter was discovered, what was the reaction of the Hollywood film industry? When the aged envelope bearing the trembling words, "For those who care when I'm no longer here," surfaced in the media, Hollywood was dumbfounded. Veteran actors who had once shared the screen with Gene Hackman, names like Robert Duvall, Al Pacino, and Dustin Hoffman, were visibly shaken. Many had assumed Gene Hackman had quietly retreated into a peaceful life in Santa Fe, like a battle-worn warrior laying down his sword after years of conquest. But behind the doors of his desert home, beyond the walls that shielded him from the world, lay a restless soul that had never fully found tranquility. The letter was brief, yet each line peeled back layers of the turbulent inner world of a legend, a man who had navigated the brilliance of the spotlight while teetering on the edge of shadowy depths. Throughout his illustrious career, Gene Hackman embodied the essence of rugged men and untamed spirits, characters who shattered barriers with ease. Yet fans came to realize that beneath the tough exterior was simply a man, one who grappled with fear. Fear of the uncontrollable, fear of his own thoughts. In his letter, Hackman didn't just reflect on death, but on the haunting concept of fading away a fear that eclipsed even the weightiest roles he had ever taken on. He dreaded the idea that one day his name would vanish into obscurity, like a solitary grain of sand swept away by the desert winds. To Gene Hackman, the idea of death was less terrifying than the thought of being forgotten of people, no longer speaking his name, no longer recalling the trials he experienced, the pain he suffered, or the love he had. When no one remembers, does it mean I never existed? A rhetorical question, yet one that carried the profound loneliness of a man who had spent his life under the spotlight but remained uncertain of his identity when the cameras stopped rolling. His final letter became one of Hollywood's most peculiar farewells. It wasn't a summary of his career, nor a heartfelt message to those he loved. Instead, it was a raw and unfiltered glimpse into his inner turmoil, a moment where Gene Hackman confronted himself. No characters, no scripts, no directors. For the first and last time, Gene Hackman was wholly honest with Gene Hackman. The last letter also laid bare his deepest fears, the dread of inheriting his family's curse, the terror of being consumed by the same isolation that had haunted his father. From the boy who hid behind a door, watching his father's shadow disappear, to the old man sitting alone in the desert, penning his final words, Gene Hackman could never truly escape that shadow. He sought refuge in acting, in becoming countless other people. However, in the end, the one person Gene couldn't fully become was the true Gene Hackman. What sent shivers through fans the most was the last haunting prophecy in his letter. If you're reading this, I'm already part of the desert wind. No one knew when Gene had penned those words, nor if he had foreseen his own departure. Yet, when the letter surfaced, he truly had vanished into the wind, becoming one with the New Mexico desert, a place where Gene Hackman had once been lost, found, and now eternally remembered. The letter didn't recount his achievements. It did not refer to his 2 Oscars or the legendary films he had graced. Instead, Gene Hackman left behind a fragment of his soul, a quiet sorrow, and an unvarnished truth. Even the greatest legends can falter when faced with the profound questions of existence. Gene Hackman will always be remembered not just as one of the finest actors in history, but as a symbol of vulnerability beneath a hardened exterior. A man who spent his life fleeing the glow of fame, only to discover that the very spotlight he sought to escape was what kept the inner shadows at bay. And that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. We truly appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Profile, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your engagement means the world to us, and we can't wait to see you in the next video.